There we go.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Faculty Focus, a conversation amongst faculty from the American Association of American Law Schools. Everyone is just now coming into the event, so give us just a few more seconds while everyone finds a virtual seat, so to speak, and then we'll be getting going. We know that there are a lot of choices for you all today, and it's a busy time of year. We really appreciate the fact that you were able to spend some time with us today. So we'll begin in just about just a few seconds here. Good, well, let's begin now. My name is Jeff Allum. I'm the Director of Research and Data Analytics at the Association of American Law Schools and moderator of Faculty Focus. This is a weekly conversation intended for tenure track, clinical, legal writing, and other non-tenure track faculty regarding the pressing issues of our time. Today, we have a really terrific lineup of speakers who are here to discuss how to meet the needs of all students in an online environment. We've asked each of our speakers to take about 5 minutes to share their thoughts on this topic. They'll engage in some small conversation with our co-hosts, and at the end of the session, we'll have some questions and answers from our participants. All attendees will be muted, but that does not mean that we don't want to hear from you. We do. Please use the chat feature and feel free to pose questions in the Q&A feature at any time. Our co-hosts will use this input throughout today's event. Also, please know that we are recording this session and we will post this on the AALS website for those really who can't attend today. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to participate and see what our speakers had to say. And now I'd like to introduce our co-hosts. First, Darby Dickerson, AALS President and Dean of the University of Illinois Chicago John Marshall School of Law, and Vince Rougeau, AALS President-elect and Dean of the Boston College Law School. Darby, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We all pivoted online in the spring, and many professors will continue to teach online for at least part of the coming academic year. This session and next week's session will allow us to discuss aspects of online teaching. This week, we're focusing on teaching to the whole class. How can we make our classes accessible? How can we engage all students? How can we be attuned to our students' challenges? It's a broad topic with many facets, and we're going to touch on several of them today to make sure that important issues are on our radar screen and also to share ideas and information. Also, we want to hear from you. Please let us know what topics you're interested in hearing about, and also let us know if you'd be willing to serve as a panelist in an upcoming session. You can reach out to Jeff, me, or Vince. And speaking of Vince, let's hear from our co-host.
Thanks so much, Darby, and welcome everyone. I just want to add my few words of welcome. This is a great opportunity for us to gather together as members of the Legal Academy. And we hope that these sessions will allow you to know that the AALS is here to support you. We're here not only to support your institutions, but we're also here to support you as faculty. And we take seriously our role as your learned society. And one of the important things we do as faculty is teach. And we want to make sure that in this current moment, we are doing everything we can to engage all of our students in these very challenging times. So I hope that you'll find today's program helpful, enlightening, and interesting. We have a wonderful group of panelists, and I look forward to the discussion. So with that, let me pass it back to Darby.
Thanks, Vince. We have 4 wonderful panelists with us today. The first will be Mark Alexander, who is the Arthur J. Kania Dean and Professor of Law at Villanova University Charles Widger School of Law. He will be followed by Laurie Rothstein, Professor of Law, Distinguished University Scholar, and former Dean at the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law. Next, we'll hear from Myrisha S. Lewis, an assistant professor of law at William & Mary Law School. And we'll wrap it up with Laurie Zimet, Director of Academic Support, University of California at Hastings. So Mark, please kick us off.
Great, thank you, Darby and Vince and everybody at AALS for pulling this together, and thanks to everybody for being on. So I wanted just to offer a few thoughts in the context of the conversation, which I understand we're trying to make this as much a conversation as possible, and to try to look at the basic question about how we can shed some light on how you, faculty, all of us, frankly, can prepare to address the needs of all students. Particularly given that we have so many with extenuating personal circumstances, financial situations, disabilities, and geographical challenges, just to name a few. And also in light of the group we're dealing with, primarily addressing junior faculty in particular, and a range of faculty. I think these things will apply a lot of places, but hopefully will be interesting for all of you. A few points I want to make in that context, and I'll just make them as points, not a formal thesis or anything, but let me just run through a few ideas. Number one, I think it's important to recognize that students may need extra help for a lot of different reasons. It may be their physical health and safety. It may be the health and safety of loved ones. There may be financial stress. There may be tech issues. They may be on different time zones. They may be in cramped quarters. So starting out, students may need extra help who otherwise might have not had any need for help, but they're coming in a different place. Second, related to that first point, you might not know while you're sitting at home, if you're teaching online, you may not recognize this challenge the same way because you can't see your students in the hall. You can't get the scuttlebutt from other students, other professors. So that normal interaction which we have with our colleagues and with our students where we just see them in the hall, you run to a kid in the classroom, and you're like, how's it going? They're like, well, bad news here or there. You can gauge them when you're all physically together. So you might miss that. So what are some of the things we might do? An idea is office hours. Just because we're not in person doesn't mean we can't have office hours. So use your personal Zoom or whatever tool you're using. Leave it open for, say, 2-3 hours, and you can use the waiting room function. I'm not an expert in these things, but there's typically a waiting room function, and turn it on the Zoom session and start doing whatever else you want to do while you wait for students. If none show up, maybe you write a few pages of your next great article. But it's time where you can just set that aside and be available for your students in a way. Again, use a large block of time, and you can still use it for yourself if no one does show up. Now, that's talking about sort of waiting for students. I think being more proactive is a great idea. So how can you be proactive? Reach out to students to have smaller review sessions. If you have a small class, request each student to have a one-on-one meeting. If you have a small class, you can easily break them down into little sessions. I did my election law class in the spring. I broke them down. I had a 2-hour session. I broke them down into smaller groups for individual topics. So be proactive and reach out to students to have smaller sessions. And that way you can be connected with them. Because it's hard for us to be physically removed and to overcome some of those barriers to understand how our students are doing. Another point, think about formative assessment. I think that's going to be critical for so many classes. It can take different forms, but some sort of formative assessment, or at least find ways to engage them, engage the students during the semester. And it may be that you have some sort of a test, a one-page writing assignment, multiple choices. You can do different kinds of ways. It doesn't have to be a full-blown midterm, but some sort of formative assessment where you can check in with them during the semester and have them check in with you. Good way to stay on top of what's going on. Another point sort of related to the earlier ones is mentor meetings. We all have the opportunity to be a mentor. They're more important now than ever. Find ways to mentor, reach out to folks. I think you'll be able to make some progress if you think about any mentor opportunities you have as a faculty member to make sure you build on those. And then one last point I would make is having conversations amongst faculty about advising, about assisting students inside the classroom, outside the classroom. having some discussions. So reach out to your colleagues, faculty colleagues, and ask your dean or your academic dean or whoever it happens to be to facilitate a roundtable or other faculty conversation about how we can assist students in this context. We may be isolated and set out at different spots, but really we're not alone, and the central administration should be able to help you. So with that said, I promised 5 minutes, and I think I'm on 5 minutes. So thank you so much for listening. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Mark, for those tips. You're a dean of a law school. We have a lot of tenure track faculty on the program today. What advice are you giving your tenure track faculty when they come to you and say, how should I be thinking about the balance of my teaching and my scholarship next year? Because I feel like I need to spend more of my time teaching than in a regular year.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a challenge frankly, it's always a challenge. And I think if we're trying new tools in our classroom, then that may be that you're going to have to spend a little more time on the teaching side. But also I think that there are plenty of ways which, frankly, a lot of junior faculty may be ahead of the game, ahead of somebody like me. I'm 20 plus years into this. You have grown up with different kind of tools. I don't mean just like as a child, but you're more used to things like Zoom. So realize actually you have a lot of advantages. I think what we have found among our faculty is that whether they're most junior, middle, or most senior, we all have different strengths we bring to this. So you're not, don't think you're so far behind the 8 ball, because in fact, some ways you're ahead, but also it is just shifting the balance.
Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
At this point, we'll hear from Laura.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. I knew this was going to happen. So I only have 5 minutes, and that's basically the amount of time for 3 elevator talks, which is something I actually teach in one of my classes, is how to do an elevator talk, how to do a TED talk, and how to do a full-blown presentation. And what I need for this presentation is all day, or at least an hour, or even a TED talk, but I only have 5 minutes. So I'm going to highlight some key points. And everyone who knows me knows I always have a takeaway. So there's a handout you can get through the chat room that's 11 pages, has references. And I want to give a shout out to Arlene Cantor at Syracuse. They have started a wonderful working document and are, I think we'll finalize that in the near future. She'll make that available. The document tells you how to get access to that. And Arlene was very, very helpful for me as we talked about what I could cover in this very short presentation. So my goal today is to alert faculty members that you can and should be thinking now about students with disabilities that range from visual and hearing impairments to learning disabilities, which are the traditional disabilities that most people think about, and how they can access and have positive experiences in online learning. These are issues that before COVID, we all had more advanced notice about. We knew if we had a student in the class that was going to need an interpreter or reader or materials in a special way. We knew if they would need extra time on exams or something, because our student service administrator would have alerted us to that. But when we go to an online setting, we have new issues. And these include how to provide some of these services when content is delivered through technology, not in person. In addition, we also have students with disabilities who will be taking in-person courses. I know this is focused on online, but they may have new accommodation issues to plan for, about how do you read lips through a mask, or what do you do about that? We have more time than we had in March and more technical assistance, and that's a work in progress, and those are being developed and so on. And those should be available at your law schools. And your student services provider, who usually handles those things, I would assume is in the process of identifying that. And I was so thrilled when I found out that Syracuse was making it possible so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And they're doing a lot of work on that. So I encourage you, faculty, to reach out to your student services administrators and say, what's going on here? What do I need to know? Am I going to have students that I need to be dealing with? But there's another group of students I want you to be thinking about, and those are students who don't meet the definition of disability under the ADA. And you need to be thinking about that in terms of ensuring best experience. And these are students who get migraines, because they reading a computer for a long time. These are students who are getting repetitive stress syndrome from using a keyboard more than they might normally use. And there are those who don't have disabilities at all or other conditions, but who have circumstances. And Mark referred to this about limited access to technology because they share a computer at home, or distractions from children and others in the household. I know this well because my granddaughters are here a lot, and I know how hard it is to do work and concentrate when you've got children or even anybody in your environment. Or those students who have heightened anxiety. Students had high anxiety in law school before this. Now they have incredible high anxiety. So the things that Mark suggests about reaching out and being proactive, I think, are very important. And so I would encourage faculty to reach out to a student services administrator to make sure they are aware of that and working. And they're really a pretty good group. And so I'm sure that they are. My general advice in unusual situations like we face today, where we don't yet have legal mandates or agency guidance or even institutional guidance that don't clearly delineate under ADA kinds of issues what you must do, what you can do, what you should do. The best advice is do the right thing, use common sense, talk to your colleagues, and but here's my dean caveat: make sure that what you're doing for one student is something that you can do for all students who are similarly situated, and that you can justify, I can do this for you now because we have an unusual situation, but we may not be able to do this forever. And to engage in interactive discussions with students and administrators as you work through those. I will close with one last cautionary recommendation, and this might seem a little weird, but I think about things because I give a lot of speeches at conferences that involve people with disabilities and disability topics. Faculty members should reach out to administrators to determine how their work, their recorded classes, their Blackboard course content, or other materials that they provide or that are saved by technology will be shared without your further permission. This will affect both intellectual property issues, what images you put on PowerPoints and so on, and it also affects the ADA because materials that are made open source or open access that you may not have realized in the past, you may have some issues with the ADA if they're not accessible in accessible format. And there's a settlement against a university where the professor put everything he did online, and that created problems because it wasn't always accessible. So I look forward to your questions and remind you that information on best practices is forthcoming, and you can access that by contacting Arlene Cantor at Syracuse, and her email address is on the materials I provided. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. I really appreciated your comments. Tenure track faculty, do check with your administration. I know my university for the fall has indicated that they're not attempting to have any rights in our works that we prepare for fall, unlike a regular online course that's developed under normal times. And also, I'm in the process of taking an online class right now, and this week's module is on accessibility. And I had not focused on the concept of availability versus accessibility versus an accommodation. And that's something, if you're not familiar with, hop online. There's a lot of material that you can read very quickly. This is something that should be incorporated in your planning. How do you make your materials not just available on the web, but accessible? Myrisha, let's go to you and hear your thoughts and comments.
Thank you for the invitation to discuss this issue. I taught property online this spring. I had 70 students. 10 of them were LLMs. And as I'll get to, right, a number of students had a number of different challenges, as Mark pointed out. And so I focused on increasing opportunities for student participation. Sort of the two main reasons were, one, as we all know, it's really hard to stare at a screen for an hour and a half when you were in class before. And there are all of these articles on Zoom fatigue and how that's affected us. And a number of people have sent emails on listservs, sort of trying to figure out how to engage students more. And then also the issues in inequity and access. So not only did specific students contact me about issues they were having, a number of them were highlighted on sort of blogs for academics, and they were a lot of the issues that Mark referenced earlier. And so I started off, right, acknowledging the challenges that students might face, whether that was about internet access, thinking about, right, we had a lot of students who might have changed where they were, whether that was because they had to leave university housing or they felt it better to go home to their home states. And so that meant, for example, that you might have, right, students who all of a sudden are trying to share internet with their siblings and their parents who are also working online. And so while I conducted live classes, I also recorded them so that a number of students would say, like, I can't participate at the same time as, right, my parents and my siblings. I keep getting kicked off of our online program. I also, right, knowing that those students would be concerned, right, in addition to allaying their concerns, I also made it so that not everything was on Zoom. Some of our learning was asynchronous, and part of that was kind of largely motivated by the pandemic, and also because a lot about the pandemic implicated property rights. So a lot of issues that we didn't think affected everyone before, that didn't get as much attention, like affordable housing issues, really came to the fore during the pandemic. And so I not only used group exercises and Zoom breakout sessions so that students could interact with their colleagues who probably weren't in the same place as them anymore, but also things like that I would have done in groups already, like we would do a lease day. So everyone read their lease, they answered all these questions to see how sort of things that were individual to them affected and related to the course. And I also had some mini research assignments. So it was a way to incorporate COVID-19 and current events. The students really enjoyed sharing, and it also let them learn from each other. So I'd sort of split them and say, what city, right, what is your specific city doing? Incorporating LLM students, right, what is your specific country doing? What is the state doing? And sort of what is your bank or apartment company doing in response to the pandemic? And so I then pulled from those responses and I kind of displayed them all in this document that the students could access. And I also discussed them in the next class on Zoom. And then I also had the students, I took advantage of Google Forms. And so for those students who couldn't participate at the same time, they would still sort of answer all these questions and send in their work. So they didn't have to be concerned about the fact that they weren't participating in the same way as other people who could probably access Zoom. And then also just sort of being cognizant of the fact that, right, some students, right, you could sort of see when people would let you know sort of, right, like these are the challenges that I'm facing, and sort of a lot of them were the type that we wouldn't necessarily expect. So like, yes, there are sort of oftentimes, right, students will say like, I'm sick today, right, I can't come in, but like it's very different in the COVID context where students would maybe have to be caregivers or, right, all of a sudden sort of like a fever took on a new meaning. It maybe wasn't the flu, it was probably something else, possibly more terrifying. And so just sort of keeping those challenges in mind and then thinking about sort of the community, the issues that Laura mentioned. So for example, just making sure for like those students who couldn't participate in Zoom that as quickly as possible, the link was posted for them to access afterwards. I had a lot more email contact with students. And so, right, sort of always sort of monitoring that. And so just sort of being flexible in general was a way to deal with those inequities.
Myrisha, are you going to be teaching online or in a blended format in the fall?
So I am on a mentoring pre-tenure leave in the fall. Okay. So I get to take advantage of what is beneficial for my colleagues in the fall to see. I'm sort of still going to monitor everything because I guess right after the unexpected turn in the spring, I sort of still kind of harbor that like concern that maybe, right, I might have to do something unexpected in the spring as well next year.
My next question was going to be, have you thought about the breakdown between synchronous and asynchronous? So I don't know if you've been chatting with colleagues and have some input about what they're doing, or if you're now focused more on your scholarship.
I think our school is kind of convening some summer workshops. I think a lot of us thought about this issue. Kind of also giving a shout out to Syracuse when we were kind of all of a sudden shockingly pivoting from teaching in person to teaching online. Nina Cohn did a webinar that was really helpful because it kind of helped us think about sort of like what was more efficient and also sort of what to do in this choice between Panopto and Zoom when it was sort of so unexpected for us. And so I'll be sort of looking there again as well. and to also to colleagues.
And Nina's going to be one of our panelists next week. So we've heard her name a few times. We're excited to hear what she has to say from her expert position. Laurie, let's go to you. Let's bring it home here.
Bear with us for just a minute. We're having a little audio problem getting Laurie online here.
Not anymore. They can hear me in San Francisco. Hi, everybody. One mouse, not happy. And we will expect these kind of things, won't we, when these things come up in our classes. Professor Zimet, Laurie Zimet, Hastings, and I want to first thank you all for caring enough about your students to be here this afternoon and still being awake enough to be here. You know that saying, when a tree falls in the forest and if there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? If you teach, but they do not learn, are you teaching? And so what we're doing here today is we're looking at how do we effectively help all of our students to learn in the challenges that are surrounding us. Now, some of these challenges we've had before. You have students who are very different in socioeconomic class, in their dreams, in their goals of who they want to be as a lawyer, as a politician. They come to you with very different life circumstances, even before what's going on now in the world. And so a number of these issues we're addressing, we've had, and now add to it what I call the, we're in the midst of an unprecedented daily living norms. That is, the students have unprecedented daily norms that are beyond their understanding. You have. I don't even know you. Can you tell I'm from New York originally, by the way? Can you already hear it? I'm from New York. The point is that they're having their own challenges, and so are you. And part of that is trying to create this understanding with a class that you can't feel, you can't sense, because they're palpably not near you, is to figure out how do we come together as a community of learners and for you as teachers to create that learning. I will say the notion of how to teach more effectively has been going on for as long as I've been in the academy. How do we get beyond the box? How do we get out of the box of traditional pedagogy that for so many of these newer generation of students simply aren't working, isn't as effective? And there could be boredom. You're not bored yet. Some of us are still terrified, no matter how many years, because we care. And so one of the things I want to just throw out to you is I have tremendous belief that in spite of, because of what's going on in the outer world, that the flaps of the box are now down. The box flaps have flattened out. I don't think there is a box. I think the box has flattened, not unlike we're supposed to have with the coronavirus, yes? And I think it creates a whole new world for faculty to be liberated and not just have the traditional pedagogy, and you can't use it because it's not practical. But isn't it? Isn't it practical? And so this is the 2 points I would make to you. Good teaching is good teaching. Good teaching is good teaching, no matter what. Whether it is in the classroom, in live, or remotely. Good teaching is good teaching. So I will suggest to you the following. The more that you do, the more that you lecture, the more that you talk, the more you learn it. The more your students do, the more that they discuss it, The more that they engage with it, the more writing assignments they can write and ponder and apply and create, the more they will learn it. True in remote, true in person. The more you do, the more you talk, the less they learn, the better you get it. But they don't get it, or they get it passively. That's called active learning. Secondly, you have resources at your disposal here via AALS and this wonderful panel. You also have your own school's IT. I'm going to quote a faculty member that I spoke with who does brilliant active learning in her classes remotely. And most of all, watch this, something you would not have put on the agenda here. Students, your past students and current students. I can't say that enough to you. When I got called to do this AALS presentation, I immediately called back, did I not? I immediately called, can I use this phone thing anymore? Is that even real? Flip. I immediately called back and I said, wait a minute, how can we talk about teaching without having students here to talk with us? We're always talking about teaching, but let's include the students because they're friggin' experts. They sit in your class, they spent all of spring in your classes. They got to see the different professors who did great things that they went, aha, oh my gosh, this is great. And they also got to snooze. And they got to what? Have their photos not on, so you couldn't see them. And they're I'm gonna lean over to my other monitor. And they're shopping and they're emailing and you would never know. Or I have a Bose speaker. I didn't lose you, right? I still have you. And I walk around the house with it sometimes at faculty meetings. Don't tell. There's a million ways for these people to be distracted, just like for us. And so one of the things I'll suggest to you is they are the experts. And with all due respect, they know so much better about this technology online interface stuff than we could ever. Even our junior faculty who are I was thinking we should have senior faculty on here. Wouldn't it be nice to break us all up into teams and assign one of those? Because the folks who had the most difficulty at my school were the senior faculty. So this summer, what did I do? What did I do when I got invited here? Initially, I hired 5 RAs to help me out to explore yet another platform we're transitioning to. And so what they will be doing is, from a student perspective, playing around with the platform, creating active learning exercises, educating me about how to use the platform to best do my work. So here's a couple of suggestions I might make just for some of the notions of creating community and being able to be active. Jeff, give me 1 extra minute. I so deserve it. First, you might consider pre-recording a welcome to your students now that you've never done before. Welcome them to the classroom, let them see you. Ask them what helped your learning last semester, what interfered with your learning, what do you anticipate this semester? I know a faculty member, in order for them to meet their students, even before remote, they had the student record a 1 minute, hi, I'm Laurie Zimet, I have a Beagle and a Basset, I love these things. And the professor did it first and sent it out. And then the professor looked at each one, 1 minute each, and they got to know their students. If it's 50 students, it's less than an hour. Get to know your students. Figure out ways to meet them. Google Doc. You know that Harry Potter movie where the document all of a sudden starts having writing on it, or there's like footprints moving around, they come up like magically? Google Doc can be something you could use actively in your class to assign different teams, different students to write on the document, and it becomes alive. Everybody's interacting and you can go visit the different teams. Reflection pieces. This is probably one of the most important ones, and I'll finish on this. Having the students reflect what they've learned after a class or after a very hard exercise you've really been working on. What did you learn from this? What else would you like to know? What did you learn from this? What else do you want to know? Give them 2 to 3 minutes, 4 minutes, have them upload it, read them, do it on your first class to establish a norm and then do it regularly. Respond to them. Oh, I don't have time to respond to 50 students. You have time to respond. Oh, that's an interesting idea. And what these free writes will show you is how wonderful you're doing and how they're really learning based on, and specifically, they're eager to tell you how it's working, how it's not. by reinforcing their learning. And I would offer you the very same suggestion. Please, when this webinar is done, please, I know you won't do it, but please, the minute it's done, put your keyboard out or take your hand out and have what's called a pen and write the following. What did I just learn from this webinar that will make me a better teacher? What else do I want to know? 3 minutes, and it will all come together. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for your commitment to your students. I thank AALS for enabling this to happen. Thank you. I'm muting.
Well, thanks to all of our wonderful speakers. This was a really important conversation and a really enlightening panel. We have some questions, some of which I think may have been answered, but I'll throw out a couple just to see if people would like to elaborate a little bit more on some of these themes. And maybe I'll start with you, Mark, with this question, since you were at the beginning and you may, having heard everyone, want to add a few points. So the question is, could you share some examples of types of questions that have helped you elicit feedback from students? I think Laurie gave us a number of examples that were really instructive, but others may want to add some of their own. So Mark, did you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, questions that elicit feedback. I think maybe consistent with everybody, just anything that you're wondering about that you would like to hear. It can be factual, like we asked all of our students whether they had enough access to printing. And we said it could be printers, paper, ink, anything. That was very factual. And we set up a way to provide them support for that. But it also could be something that is emotional. How are you feeling? How are you doing today? I think also asking, how do you feel about when we're doing a Zoom session? We asked directly, do you prefer to have a Zoom session? And I think to Laurie's point, with an assignment immediately afterwards? Do you want to do an assignment beforehand? So the point is that there's so many different things we want to know. And whatever you want to know, don't be afraid to ask. Obviously, there's personal space, which we want to maintain. But even in that context, you can say, you don't have to tell me anything. But please know, if you have something you want to talk about, I'm here to support you. And I can also direct you to the resources you would need. So I think the key is, whatever you're thinking you want to know, you can ask it.
Thanks, Mark. Another question that's related is, how do we think about hybrid courses as opposed to purely online courses, in terms of thinking about the ways that, best ways to interact with students and to elicit information and to engage them? I might, maybe I'll start with Myrisha for this one. Do you have any thoughts on things that in your mind would work particularly well in a hybrid environment? I know you sort of did in person and then moved to online, but maybe that process gave you some insight on that this past semester. You're on mute right now. Yep.
Yes, I'm muted now. Yes, so thinking about sort of just ways where students can incorporate more contemporary issues into the class. So that's something I sort of always think about, for example, especially with property, for example, sort of this class that focuses on, right, like land and Blackacre. And so, right, for many students, they don't have that. So thinking about sort of what issues apply to them. And so I was thinking about it as sort of, I would walk around, for example, I live in Richmond right now. And so I would see like signs that would say like rent strike, everyone don't pay your rent on April 1st, or things where you would see like, oh, this is a historic building. And so I think for future classes, just incorporating, making sure there's even more flexibility to say like, we're also going to consider this current court case, for example, and how it applies to property law and informs these doctrines that we're considering. And then using some of the things that I use during online teaching, like using Google Forms as this way to sort of gather information. It's a little more effective for us, and using the platform where everyone sort of posts online in these discussion boards. And again, I'd also say sort of looking at resources. And so another way that I sort of thought about the role of discussion boards was looking at sort of what colleagues were doing, and also a lot of faculty posted great articles before we all pivoted online. And so another person whose article I found useful was Agnieszka McPeak's article, Asynchronously Online Law School Teaching, a few observations. And so she pointed out that she had sort of developed these innovations during the time of Katrina. And so I found that very useful as sort of like another example of someone who had to pivot during this sort of unexpected calamity. And so it's something that I would consider for hybrid courses, or even incorporating certain aspects of what we've learned now to even doing the standard in-person class.
Thanks so much, Myrisha. Laurie, maybe you had some ideas in that same vein. I wonder if there was anything else you'd like to add. There you go.
Yeah, always. Thank you. Thank you, sir. This notion of the students doing, and I love the work that you're doing in the property class. So the more the students do to apply and understand the concepts themselves, the more that they will learn. So for example, for easements, some property professor used to have them physically go out and take photos of easements, but we're in a pandemic. Instead, now they can go online and show the example of whatever they've got. They could have a slideshow. I, in my own class, have I have the students create the PowerPoints at the end of the class. They're assigned a given area, and they have to, not me creating the PowerPoint, they create the PowerPoint at the end as a way of really internalizing and learning the information. I can't tell you how clever they are about using photos and videos and audio and whatever they're doing in their fonts. They're professional, and the thing is, when they're done creating a PowerPoint of whatever segment of the class, they've learned it. So there are a variety of active things you can have them be doing, so that the more, I mean, I could have taken pictures of the easements and done a slideshow, and I would have learned it. The more they do, the more they learn. Thank you.
Okay, I want to shift a bit to some kind of more general issues about, I guess, in a sense, student wellness and some of the issues that may affect students sort of behind the scenes. And maybe I'll direct this initially to Laura. How do we handle students who might, say, be reluctant to come onto the camera? We're noticing students who won't reveal themselves. Do we have to require that they do? How do we talk about sort of, maintaining, I guess, a professional presence in a Zoom class? Or, I mean, how do we set expectations for community life in the context of a Zoom classroom? Do we reach out individually to students that we perceive may not understand the norms or may need more engagement around them? Do we risk, deepening fissures within the community by doing that? I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
Sure, and I'm going to follow up on some of the things that Laurie said about being proactive. And I know this is a group where probably all of us are very proactive in reaching out. Back in the old days, before we were doing all this online, I would observe a student who seemed reticent on a day or tired. I've seen students who were sleeping outside. And when they're physically in your space, it's easier to observe that and reach out. So I think we have to be even more conscious than ever in being proactive. And it may be, and I'm thinking through how I'm going to teach. I have property in the fall. I have my disability law seminar in the fall, that I plan to reach out to each one individually at some point during the semester, probably more than once. And where I sense people aren't coming through, to be proactive and back again in the old days, when I would see a student that I thought was, or observed through online behavior, I would contact my student services administrator and say, do you know if everything's okay with so-and-so? And are other professors telling you that they're having a problem? it's going to be harder for us to do that online, but we can do it. And Laurie, I'm going to follow up on something that you said. At the beginning of every property class, I always have them fill out a little index card that tells me, I said, tell me anything you want to tell me about yourself, but it's something that I can do a shout out to you when I call on you, that you like Game of Thrones, or your favorite team is, you know, the Mets or something. And I kind of share that kind of things myself, and it does help. So I'm going to try to do what Laurie suggested, equivalent of that online at the beginning. It is going to be harder. It's more work for us. I do sympathize with those who are under the pressure of writing, and I know most deans are limiting the service that's going to be expected this year, because this is more work. But I'd say we have to be more insightful in terms of proactive reaching out to students, even if we can't physically observe them, but to pay attention to when they're not showing up in a Zoom kind of scenario.
You know, Vince, if I could add to that for a second. You know, I knew a guy many years back who was, I don't know what you call an internet pioneer or something like that. He's early developer of softwares and things like that. So I was talking to him one time just over dinner, and he said, you know, the thing to remember is that what we're doing online and with our computer technology, et cetera, is we're just taking human interaction and doing it in a different form. And, you know, trying to sort of demystify the computer in a sense. And, you know, when we talk about the student who's not awake, we've all had students who fall asleep in our class, hopefully few, but it happens. Even the most scintillating teachers, it happens. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. And you sometimes have to say, oh, you know, Mr. Smith, I see you're, you know, do you have an answer to this? Or sometimes you have to grab Mr. Smith after class. There's ways in which we deal with it. And I think that sometimes we're going to have to, you know, it's uncomfortable, but I think that in some ways we want to encourage students to make them understand, like, we still need that interaction. And so turning off your screen is not really an option. Now, that's hard, but at the same time, how do we know that a student has attended if we only get their box? You know, I can do this. So I've just turned off my box. And, you know, I can turn it back on. But, you know, my wife could come in and sign in for me. So I think it matters sometimes. Again, if somebody is not there and they're sitting there with a name tag that's not them, we have to confront that if it's physically in person. And we have to confront that otherwise. Now, again, it's not always, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we shouldn't say just because it's on the computer doesn't mean we don't have to confront it. Because if we don't interact with our students, then we are doing them a disservice.
Well, this is a nice segue into a couple of other questions that have come in, and I want to I'll make this sort of a compound question and maybe address it to everyone, and people can jump in and hit either or both. One thing we've learned and we're learning is, you know, online learning does offer this, I would say, you know, positive opportunity through asynchronous learning to, you know, allow students for whatever reason can benefit by being able to access material on their own schedule at a different time. And so that can be a good thing. But one issue that comes up from that is, you know, how do we kind of build engagement for those students later? And how do we ensure that they don't become completely passive learners? And then to building on that point, someone else asked, some people really need the discipline of real-time classes and structure. So without sort of making the choice one way or the other, how do we balance the interests and choices between asynchronous and live delivery? I mean, what are our responsibilities as instructors in that regard? And also, how do we bring those students who are learning asynchronously into meaningful engagement with the rest of the class? So I'll throw that out to whoever wants to jump in first.
Sure. I first have to say, the language kind of dupes me. I think of either pre-recorded or live, the asynchronistic, the synchronistic, whatever that is. I think either you pre-record it and that's it, or it's live and I'm with you and then they'll record that. I experimented with both. As soon as we knew, I could smell it was coming. And so so a couple things. One is you can figure out how to do the pre-recorded, because the students actually said they like it. No surprise, it's passive. They're watching. Yeah. Oh, I'm learning. Yeah, right. But it was also part of the course that was not like I teach defamation with a series of constitutional law cases. That wouldn't have been good for the pre-recorded. But then I teach a products liability that was more kind of restatement and UCC, and there weren't a lot of cases with that. So I happened to have been there. So your course content may lend itself more for some kind of lecture, but you're so right. What we want to do is connect an active learning exercise or a series of them with that particular class, whether it's pre-recorded. And so you heard me, I'll have them do a PowerPoint. Yeah, and I have to tell you, over the years since I've taught this course, I have amazing student-created PowerPoints, the like of which I have never seen. But I had to not use them. I made them vanilla. Either my TA made it vanilla, so that the students themselves can engage in their own creativity. Having a written assignment, you know, I have to put this plug, create a hypo. Have them, the more hypos you create, the more you learn it. Have your students think about a fact scenario that would be, you know, testing that particular area, not a page long, couple sentences. And here's the key, submit it. If you're on Canvas, if you're on Zoom, whatever your platform is, they'll resent me or I'm not going to punish them. And if I threaten to punish them, they're adult learners. Children you can threaten to punish and it works. Then they go into therapy for the rest of their lives. Adult learners, punishing them does not work. And so part of it is for them to think that you actually care. I have them submit all their briefs. I have them submit outlines. I have them submit create out your own hypo and then answer it. Sometimes I'll break them into the small groups once they've uploaded and I've looked at them so they're not harming anybody. Sometimes what somebody thinks is funny is not funny. Same thing with the PowerPoints. I always review them before the students present them. So there's a variety of ways to build in even to what I call the pre-recorded, class, and even for those who are coming after and could not join you live. And I will say to you, the students, I have a whole list, I'm not going to do it to you, a whole list of the suggestions from the students. And one of them was having professors flexible because there's so much going on right now.
Laura?
I want to add to that being flexible and so much going on. One of the things I did a speech about several years ago was about millennials and the ADA. And as the computers and technology started building up, I found that people are just on overload. There's so much coming at you. And I was on sabbatical this semester, so I didn't have to teach, but I did have the full-time care of 2 little ones during that time. But I would open up my computer in the morning and I would see listserv after listserv after listserv telling me I've had this great experience doing this and great experience doing that. And I was overwhelmed with, okay, who do I listen to? Who do I pay attention to? And then I sat back and I thought, they're going to figure it out for me. And by fall, I'm going to know who had good experiences. And that's why I think what Syracuse is doing and what I think some of the listeners are doing and what AALS can help us do is to kind of create a package of best practices or best experiences so that I don't have to go through 500 emails to say this worked for me, this worked for, and some of us know who do we trust, who do we have, who do we know that does good work. And I think that is the challenge our students have is information overload. And that's the challenge we have. And AALS can help us with sort of sort that through and kind of fine tune that.
And you know, I would build on that point. And I don't know however many people are on this call and will watch it later on, but you're here because you care about your students. You're a law professor. I mean, we are so lucky to be professors. And it is our passion and something we care greatly about. And we have standards. And so trust yourself that your standards are going to get you there. You know, there's there's no one who doesn't have an occasional bad class. So don't, just because you have a bad class and it's because your internet was spotty, um, that doesn't mean you're not doing it. It's just like you have a bad class because, you know, you forgot your notes one day, or, you know, whatever the problem is. But remember your commitment to your students and why you're in this in the first place, and you will do great. And just understand you're change the ways you're doing it. But I think to that point, like, get the feedback from your colleagues. And I think, you know, particularly junior faculty, ask one of the senior faculty who may be more of a mentor and say, give me some advice, and build on that, because you're committed to this and you can make it happen. There's no doubt that we all are committed to this and can make it happen. And now I think is the time we're just, you know, trying to find the best particular ways of achieving our goals.
Jump in for 1 sec. I don't think of you doing more work. I think we should have been doing this work for years. I think we're going to have better lawyers, as oddly as that sounds, by the end of this pandemic and the violence and all of the kind of community building and what our and the overt patent caring clearly about our student learning and our student wellness. And I will throw out one thing before I finish my last statement, is if I lean backwards, you could see there's a board there. Can you see that? There's a whiteboard there. And I just want to sing to you 1 minute, memories, because I'm going to teach. I took that from the classroom. I'm not going to teach much, but I think it will be nostalgic for me to be in a little suit with my pen, and I'll have a little holder, one of those tripod, you know, wrappers for this webcam. And I'm going to just stand there and say, memories, remember? And then I'll stop. But there's nothing beyond us in terms of making this accessible, inviting, and engaging, because they really will appreciate whatever effort you're doing.
Well, as we wrap up, I thought I would maybe just add in conclusion as a dean that we know that I know that a lot of people on this call are, you know, junior folks who are early in their careers and who are building their careers. And, you know, one of the lessons that we've taken from today is you're working really, really hard on your teaching. It's taking a lot of time and a lot of effort. And in a sense, I think we also know that the reward structures in a lot of our schools have generally not been geared toward the work that you're doing now and the amount of time and effort that you're putting into this exercise. So I would encourage all of you to, you know, speak up, talk to your deans and associate deans, and, you know, point them to some of these resources and to these webinars so that they understand, if they don't, that the work you're doing here is extraordinarily valuable. It's really keeping our schools moving in the right direction, and it's bringing the students, and you need all the support that you can get, because I'm sure some of you are probably also feeling that there are members of your communities who maybe don't value teaching to the degree that they should in these times. And it's important that we recognize all that you're doing to keep our teaching top notch. So I just thought it was important to add that, because I know that's a stress for a lot of junior folks. Well, with that, we maybe have time for one more question. I don't see anything that's sort of popped up, but Myrisha, you, maybe I'll give you the last word because you haven't had a chance to say anything just yet.
Yes, I was just going to say about the topic of student engagement, or trying to keep the students in, even though we're all in different places. I still cold called, so I think that was sort of one solution to, I still had it wasn't sort of, when we were creating these online classes, we didn't sort of, I don't think it was like a concern or something we thought about, that they could sort of eventually flip through the video, or they could post their photos. Although in certain instances, I think it also might have been a bandwidth issue. And so I found that I would also do Zoom breakout sessions where they would try to talk amongst themselves, and I would pop into every single breakout session so they knew that someone was going to be there to see that they were actually discussing the topics that they were given. And so I think that was one way where students could ask the questions that they would have asked in class if we were doing online assignments as well. And then also just thinking about also sort of responding, I would sometimes say in some of my mini research assignments, I'd say like anything else you'd want to share. And I think for some students, that was a way to show sort of like some issues that they were facing, whether it was sort of like unexpected changes in housing, for example. And I also let students know sort of throughout the semester, like this is right something we didn't all expect. We basically had a weekend to start teaching online. And so, right, we're all going to have to be flexible. And so I think that facilitated a way for some students, right? Students would reach out and say, you know, I really liked when we had this research assignment, or these certain exercises are really useful to us. So sort of thinking about other things that people have suggested, where we say sort of like, how can we facilitate interactions with our students?
Well, I want to thank this very dynamic panel for the wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to everyone who joined us, either live or after the recording. And we hope that we see many of you next week when we're going to talk about excellence in the online classroom. Thank you very much.